Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I love the chance to share about the fellowship of AA and Al Anon because they change people's lives. It did mine. I came to Al Anon in 1978. I was 32 years young. I was a single parent, and my daughter was drinking alcoholically. She was 15 years old. I'd been married twice, and although I didn't know it, I was angry, scared, heartbroken, feeling like a failure, and on the edge of suicide. I hated everyone like me. That means anyone who was self-righteous, self-centered, controlling, and angry. My childhood was good. I came from a good family. There were no drugs, no alcohol, no abuse, no communication. And what I mean by that is we didn't talk about feelings. It was just suck it up. If you cry, I'll give you something to cry about. Just suck it up. So I had no little emotional support, but it was basically growing up. We got up in the summertime, had breakfast, and out the back door, and I guess we came home at lunch maybe, but you didn't have to come home till it got dark. We didn't even have streetlights, so the kids in the city, they could come home when the streetlights came on. So to me it was a life of freedom. We went everywhere. We were not afraid of anything. It was my sister and me. I had an older sister, and so life was good. Up until I can remember when I was probably about 7 or 8 or 9. My parents, my mother was raised Catholic, my father was raised Mormon, and I do believe that they basically gave their families the finger and said, "Hey, we're getting married," because that just wasn't done to cross interfaith marriages. So my father was a race car driver, and for 16 years they had no children. They were married, and he was a race car driver. My mom went with him, and she would keep logs of, I found all the logs of the races they went to, and who placed first, second, and third, and if somebody didn't finish, why, what broke on the car, or was there a crash, all those things. That were kind of interesting. Someday I'd like to write about that. But anyway, for 16 years, I imagine they had a wonderful life. They got married and off to the racetrack, and my father went into the service after 16 years, and World War II. I assume that he went after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and he came home, I think about 2-3 years later, on a medical leave. And I understand today that he was suffering PTSD. He had shot a bunch of Japanese, and I think he suffered from killing those people. He had told my sister, and my sister told me, I was sitting there listening to the story too, but the fact was he shot this man so many times they emptied his whole magazine onto this man long after he was dead, and he was ashamed, and he would promised himself that he would never lose his temper like that, lose control again. And so that's how I was raised. My mother was, like I say, Catholic, and she went along with him. I felt like they were a team, and they had a good time. My father comes home on a medical leave, and 9 months and 2 days later, my sister is born, and then me directly after that. And my mother always told us that she always felt like my father didn't believe that when she got pregnant, because it was 9 months, 2 days after he comes home from the service, and for 16 years, they were pretty sure she couldn't have any children. So he thought she might have been messing around while he was in the service. But anyway, so I don't know if it's partly that. or the fact that now all of a sudden, with after 16 years and having a good life and popping out 2 children, definitely puts a strain on any marriage, I would assume. And so when I can remember when I was about 8 or 9, they started to have marital problems. And my mother was, all I know is she was quite unhappy. I think a lot of it was disciplining us. I think my mother thought he was being too strict with us. And I can, because if we were due a spanking, if we ran, we got, twice 2 spankings. But anyway, so my dad pretty much retired, just kind of went to his room a lot and into the bedroom. And I think my mother had moved upstairs into another bedroom. And so there was just a distance between them. But just before all of that happened, I was probably about 7 or 8 or something, and I saw my mother in her bedroom crying, and I went in, and first of all, I had put this sign on my bedroom door, and it talked about, I don't know, counseling. I don't know if I knew how to spell that, but anyway, it said counseling, and I ventured into their bedroom, because you're not allowed to go in their bedroom, but I did anyway, and I tapped her on the shoulder, and I asked her to come see. So I showed her my sign, and all she said was, how in the world do you think you can fix the trouble between your dad and me? And it just kind of crushed me, and I thought, well, and I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I was upset that she was crying, and I wanted her to fix it. My dad was always sad, and I assume the whole time after he came home from the service, he had migraine headaches a lot. He was also the father of the son of an alcoholic. So my father really was a undiagnosed Al-Anon. And so anyway, my mother became very unhappy. Like I say, all of that was probably, I don't know if I didn't see that. They didn't fight, they didn't argue, and they just kind of, my dad, by the time when he came back from the service, he retired from racing once us kids were born, I'm assuming, and bought apartment houses. So they rented out apartments at these 3 apartment houses they had, and so he went to work every day and came home for lunch and came home for dinner, and he was always at dinner. He was just a sad person. I could tell that, and I always tried to make him laugh. So I was basically trying to fix people when I was 6 and 7 years old. Maybe that was my calling. I don't know. I feel like that. So my mother decided that, and she had told me, she said she had asked for a divorce, and he had said, well, if you divorce me, you won't get any of my money. And that's the way it was back then. So I assume she decided she was not leaving, but what she adopted the mission of raising her 2 girls, and she was determined they would never be dependent on a man. So she started teaching us how to make money, and first she would take us to the lake, and we'd collect soda pop bottles, and we'd take them and turn them in for money. And then she discovered she started dropping us off in better neighborhoods, and we had these big trash bags, and we would go around and knock on people's door and ask them if they had any old clothes or rags that they didn't want. And I'm sure that everybody thought we were poor, and they would give us stuff. And what it was we would collect these rags and clothes, and then my mom took us to the newspaper, and the newspaper at that time needed rags to clean their the ink off of their presses, and they paid 15 cents a pound, which was really good back in the 50s, 40s and 50s, early 50s, and so it was good money. And then a man moved in down the street, and he was a professional dog handler. And my sister and I hung out at his kennels all the time, and we helped him clean the runs and feed the dogs, and we were always down there, and we were watching him groom dogs for show, and he even took us to a dog show once, and I got a little picture somewhere of me showing I got a ribbon for junior showmanship. But anyway, so somehow my mother, I went and talked to him and decided that ask him if he would teach us how to groom. Now what her idea was, we were going to become dog groomers, and so he had been watching, but geez, we were 10 and 11 at the time, and so basically I think all he did was show us how to shave the face on a poodle and the feet on the poodle, and that was about it. We'd been watching, but anyway, so my mom cleaned out the coal room in the basement and painted it and everything else, and he had given us a couple grooming crates, and we were off and running. He was moving to out of town to Mississippi, back to Mississippi where he had come from, and so he referred all of his retired grooming show dogs to us. And we started a little business, and of course there wasn't much competition, so you got what you got with 10, 11 years old girls. But anyway, it became a thriving little business, and every weekend we would groom dogs, and we were making good money. I can remember how excited I was to go to the best stores in Springfield, Illinois, and my sister was never content. She was always kind of the sad one, and she was kind of the mean one too. One time she locked our neighbor's mother in her woodshed, and we went off and ran running and everything. She was always teasing me and making me cry when I was little, and she always got in trouble when I cried because I was the youngest and she was older and she shouldn't do that. So either way, I tagged with my sister everywhere we went because she was the older one, and she was a little braver than me. I wasn't afraid, but I went along. I had no outside friends. My parents really had no outside friends that I knew of. Once in a while, one of my dad's racing buddies would stop by. I remember one was, I looked up because they were always nervous when he came, and he ended up being a Indianapolis 500 champion race car driver back in like 1929 or something like that. But anyway, we had this wonderful business going. My mom was putting money aside, and we started saving money, and the house next door came up for sale, and I know it was like $8,000, and she thought we should buy that for an investment, us kids, and so it was in our name, and we'd have to go over there and cut the grass, and we did all this stuff, and it wasn't like work to us. I don't know, we just did it. I liked the money, and Mom taught us how to save money and whatever. So life is going good. In fact, I know she's proud that her two daughters by the time we're 15 and about teenagers, 15 or something, she had written to a teen magazine, 16. Yeah, it's a popular teen magazine, and they were going to come out and do a story about my sister and I in our little business. The Canine Beauty Salon is called. So anyway, they were coming, and by this time, like I say, I'm almost 16, and I'm in love with a guy in high school. My sister is dating, and I'm jealous she's dating, and I have no dates. And I finally, this boy that I was in love with, I had a couple dates with him, and I was nervous and shy, and it was cool. But I also went to the skating rink, and at the skating rink, roller skating rink, and with my girlfriends, and this boy had invited me to go out to the car and have a Coke, and I was just flattered that he wanted me to go out to the car. I went out to the car with him, and I still don't know. I was very, very innocent, something happened in the car, but basically I got pregnant. I remember him on top of me. It's to this day, it's a very vague memory. I wasn't afraid or anything. I just didn't know what he was doing. And whatever he was doing, when he got done, we went back inside and that was it. And I believe it was like that next day, my mother saw blood on my panties, and she came in and she was almost screaming at me what I had done. And she thought I'd been with the boyfriend that I had been dating. And I said, no, I was at the skating rink. And so she had me tested and I was pregnant at 16. It was there was no religion in our family, so I didn't have to be told I had sinned. And there had never been a lot of discussion about sex or anything. I don't know if this happened before or after, but my mother always said, sex is a beautiful thing, but we should be married. And that was about it. I didn't see it as a dirty thing or a bad thing. And so when this happened, my parents were not, I know my mother was upset, but no one put me down for it. It didn't seem like. And so I had to drop out of high school, and my father had taken me. I can remember this day. I can see it when I talk about it. We sat on the couch, my mom, my dad, and me in the middle. And my father is saying, look, you have 3 choices of what you can do when they found out I was pregnant. And he says, first of all, you could go away and have the baby. And I just thought to myself, I was only 16 and I'd never been away from home. And I just couldn't even, I don't know. I didn't want to go. I don't want to go away. And he says, oh, you can marry the boy. And I certainly had no feelings for the boy, but I knew my father did not want me to marry him. He was from like the wrong side of the tracks, and he did not want that. And he says, or you can have an abortion. And when he said that, my mother gasped, and I could just feel her fear. And so that scared me. And of course, abortion was illegal. I do believe that if I had decided on an abortion, my father would have found one that was safe. But anyway, all I know is my mom, that just terrified my mom. Between her probably Catholic upbringing and that, I decided I'd marry the guy. And he had said, well, let's get married, the guy. So to me, it was the easy way out. My father had apartments, houses. We got set up in we paid rent. I paid rent because I was the one working. I had plenty of money out of my dog grooming business. And I would pay my folks rent every month. And probably was like $30 or something. I don't know what it was. Anyway, so we get married and we move into this apartment house. Now, the father of my baby, I don't even think he came around after that. I pretty much had the place to myself. And so we got married. I had the baby, and my parents are, and I want to go back to school. And my parents had said, my mom came to me one day and she says, if you don't divorce him, you won't get any of our money. And I thought, okay, so she's giving me some incentive, because I was just in La La Land. I was just a sentence girl. I knew my parents had been concerned so much about this pregnancy and everything else. They were very supportive, and while so I divorced the man, and now I'm ready to go back and finish high school. And again, I because I was in La La Land, I know there was a problem of getting back in school. Of course, I know now the school would not let you come back if you've been pregnant and out of wedlock and had a baby and all this stuff. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't. I know they had told my parents I can't come back. And again, I'm almost positive my father must have went down and talked to him, because he copped a deal. And the deal was, when I went back to high school, I could not socialize with any of the other kids. And so if they had, never was one to go to the football games or dances or anything like that. I had my two best girlfriends that I ran with and went horseback riding with and everything else. But as soon as when I got pregnant, I never ever heard from them again, and never thought much of it either. Again, I'm not connected to too many people. I mean, there was just no emotion. I guess I was closed off emotionally. But so anyway, and if they had an assembly at the school, I was to sit in the principal's office until that was over, and then I could go back to my class. So anyway, so that's for 70 years, now I am 77. For 70 years, I have told everybody, I'd tell that story and everybody would say, whoa, that's just so terrible that you went through that. I says, well, it really didn't bother me. I says, I just pushed through it and then went on to college and whatever. So I really believe that didn't bother me. And I'm an author now, and I was writing an autobiography in 2015. My sister had passed away, and I had promised her that I would go back to my hometown and visit all the haunts we used to go to. And so I did. And it must have been summertime. The high school was closed. There was nobody there, but it wasn't locked. You could walk through the halls. So I was walking through the halls thinking about that. And I got up to the principal's office, and it had a glass door and windows. And then right across the hall, which I don't know, but there was the trophy case with all the trophies of the football teams and all that stuff. It was right across the hall. But anyway, I walking through the halls, reminiscing and stuff, and I got to the principal's office, and I looked at that principal's office, and all of this rage just welled up inside of me. I didn't know, and of course by this time I'm 70 some years old, and I've had a lot of Al-Anon behind me, but I did not know that I had all this rage and this anger, and it just astounded me that had bothered me a lot. And it became very clear I never liked religious people. I didn't like hypocritical religious people. I hated them. And now I understand why. A lot of that had to do with religion, and I understand, the people were doing what they were doing. That was where their perspective was now, but I never thought how much that affected me until then. So anyway, I go back to high school, and the old high school boyfriend that I was in love with contacted me one time. He came over to my apartment, and I can remember what he had wanted to see me, and I remember when he came to see me, there was this, and I didn't know it then, but I know now. I just get emotional when I think about it, because I have had this emotional attachment. Your old high school boyfriend, your first love, or whatever it is. You always carry something with you all through the years, even though you go your separate ways and whatever. And that's how it had been with me. He's probably in every one of my books. He's a character, and when I write a character in a love story, he's the one I think of. But anyway, he came to see me that after at my apartment, and I know today, out of all that had happened to me with this pregnancy, my parents, I say, they weren't upset with me, but my sister, no one came up. I knew everybody was up. So it was like the high school and their scarlet letter. No one put their arms around me. Nobody said, this is going to be okay. I just went through that without any emotional support. And when this boy comes and knocks on my door, he was the only one. Like I said, I never saw my girlfriends again, never give it much thought. But when he came to see me, I knew he loved me, and I knew I loved him. And it was as if I wasn't the bad seed, the slut that everybody thought I was. And I say, and the only other time I was touched was the first day I went back to high school, returned after my pregnancy and my divorce and having the baby and everything else. I was in the girls' locker room, and someone if she was one of the most popular girls. She was on the city council and all kinds of. I didn't run with that crowd, but I knew who she was. And I was in the bathroom and girls' bathroom. I was washing my hands, and she came up to me, and she said, "Welcome back." And the high school boyfriend and her are the only ones who had ever given me any kind of kindness, or and it was not like anybody was mean to me, uh, but um, but it was genuine, and I like I say, I didn't realize that all of that had bothered me so much, but now as an adult, looking back on that, there was just no emotional support. So anyway, I go back, and so I see the boyfriend, and um, he, even after I went to college, he would drive to college to see me several times, and we never broke up. We just kind of drifted apart, and I'm sure he could. One time I remember him asking me to marry him, but he he'd been drinking, and I just didn't take him seriously because I don't know. He probably joked around we ought to get married, and I just laughed, because I don't know why, but I just didn't take him seriously. Anyway, we went off, and I'm sure his parents wouldn't have wanted him marrying some girl who had a baby by another boy. So anyway, we went our separate ways. And I went to college. I dropped out after, and I basically, it was the 60s by now, and I had a lot of one night stands. And I think that I understand now today I couldn't get close to anybody, but I had a lot of one night stands, and it was just enough of a connection that this connection that I was searching for, it was satisfying enough, and I was having a pretty good time. So I got married. I married while I was in college. I was home for the holidays, and I had a cousin who was home from the Marines at the same time, and my mom had told me, he's the only, he was wondering if maybe you wanted to go out and do something. We were home for the weekend, and I was not like this cousin and I were that close or anything, but I said, sure, we'll go out and have a beer or something. So I remember before I was walking out the door, my father came up to me and he says, "You be careful of him." Now, my father never gave me any advice. Actually, he'd retired from telling us kids what to do. His two girls, my mom was in charge, and I never got much advice from my father at all. I mean, I could count on one hand the kinds of advice that have stuck with me, and that was one of them. But I don't know, it must have irritated me. I think I was always a little rebellious because I didn't think my father really loved me anyway. He was so distant. I knew my mother loved me. Was one of the things that when my mom was wanting to go through a divorce, she wanted to know who I wanted to live with. And I told her, I thought about it, and I knew that she loved me, but I was never sure about my dad, and he was always so sad. And so I had told her I would live with him. And she just became irate, and she yelled at me. She says, "You always were a daddy's girl." And I thought, well, and I know at that time I said, don't ever always tell people because they may, what you think or your opinion, because they may not take it well. And so I learned quite early, you don't rock the boat, basically. So anyway, I got married. I'm home for the holidays, and we're at the bar and we're having a few drinks, and we start making out. And the next thing you know, we start dating, and I ended up marrying him right after we'd been dating for a short period of time, because I thought he would be a good father for my daughter, who was now about 3 years old, 4 years old about that time, and I figured she needed a father. As I look back now, I married the first one because it was the easy way out. This one would be a good father, and that was it. I mean, he was okay, I thought, and it wasn't until I was divorcing him about 5 years later that after I divorced him, my daughter had shared with me that he had molested her, and I was. I had been raising my daughter like my parents raised me, and I didn't wrap my arms around her and say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I figured it was all okay because I wasn't living with him anymore, and that was that. And now it's like say I used to feel so bad about so many things with my daughter, but I understand through Al-Anon and what I've learned as I've worked the steps, who I was and where I came from. It was just what I had learned or not learned, because I certainly had not learned how to comfort and be close to anyone. So anyway, I was single then. I stayed single for a long time. Well, my daughter grows up, and basically my life was one night stands. I never brought the guys home. I would screw around and have a good time. And if there was a man in my life, my daughter took second seat. If not, we were best friends until she turned 16. While I started turning 16, I'm grooming dogs for a living is what I'm doing. And but anyway, I've discovered that my daughter not only has been ditching school and hiding all the slips from the school under her mattress before I got home from work, but she's drinking alcoholically. And I had known about AA, and my father had told me about AA at some point in my time, and I think he was studying a lot, trying to figure out his own life because he did so much reading, and he had said that alcoholism is a disease, and maybe I hope that gave him some peace about his own father, which I don't know, but obviously it had affected him deeply. And so I knew AA was about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I guess I found out about Al-Anon. And I march in 1978. My daughter's 15 years old, going on 16, and I'm scared. I dragged her to counseling at the beginning, and got pissed off because they wanted me to go too. I just says, just straighten her out because she isn't listening to me anymore, and everything will be fine then. So. And I wanted her to go to AA, but of course she didn't want to go. And so I came into the Al-Anon rooms angry. I didn't know all of this. I didn't know how angry I was. But I marched in there, and I did not like any of the people in Al-Anon. It seemed like everybody around the tables had a husband who was the alcoholic, and my case was different. I had a daughter, and I couldn't divorce her, or I would have, I'm sure. So I kept going to the meetings, and I don't know why, but I did, even though I didn't like it. And I actually went back to high school and studied for an alcoholic counseling certificate. I was going to figure out everything I knew about it and fix her. And so I was going to school, and I was just at my wit's end. I remember walking down the street. I had in the Al-Anon One Day at a Time book, I read this quote from Abraham Lincoln: "You're only as happy as you make up your mind to be." And I said, well, I like that. I says, I think I'll just be happy, because I was tired of being miserable. I was so miserable. And I discovered what guilt was, because I decided, okay, I'm going to be happy. And I just started walking down the street and I'm happy. And all of a sudden, this guilt comes in, and this voices come in and say, how in the world could you be happy when you've got a daughter who's drinking? And, uh, and it just hit me like a lot. I had, like I say, most of my emotions up until this point were just locked up, whatever. And I dealt with life. I was working, making the bills and whatever. So at some point I realized that I don't know how long I was in. Not long. I made less than probably 6 months. I don't know. I'm going to Al-Anon, but I don't know what to do with her, and I can't handle her. I can't get her to go back to school. And I tried to give her up for foster care. I had her arrested because she was, she'd left, she got pissed off and was living with some girlfriend. And anyway, so she went into she was going to go into foster care, and my sister, I was probably crying the blues and calling her all the time. She lived in LA. She had married into a rich family. Her husband was a veterinarian, but most of the other family members were doctors and high-end people. They lived a half a block away from Michael Jackson family in Encino, California. So she was living the high life. That's what she'd always wanted to do. So anyway, she called me up and she said, we'll take your daughter. And I thought, well, that's good, because they had a nice family, a strong family, and it would be good for her. Maybe they'd at least get her to finish high school. So she went to live with my sister, and she lived there 2 years. And when she turned 18, she did finish high school, but she pretty much gave them a finger, and she went off with I don't know if anybody back in the day, a famous newscaster, Jerry Dunphy's daughter. Jerry Dunphy was a newscaster on the LA News. And anyway, I guess I used to watch him after that, when I found out she was friends with his daughter, because they had gotten an apartment together and then got kicked out. And my daughter shows up on my doorstep on their way. They got all their belongings, each in their trash bags, and they were hitchhiking to New York. And I mean, all of this just broke my heart. But Al-Anon had taught me enough that I was powerless over the alcoholic, and I knew that much. And but the sadness and the heartbreak was just, and the feeling like a failure as a mother was just overwhelming. And about right after she left, probably, is when I became very suicidal. And I started thinking about suicide, and I had some back problems, so I had been to the doctor and had some pain pills, and I was going to take pills, and but I did not know how many it would take to do the job, and I couldn't imagine failing at that. I mean, what could be the worst failure, worse than even being a bad mother, was to fail at suicide, and I could not handle that. So, and there was no internet back then, so. But anyway, I had a girlfriend, and she sensed that I was not doing well, and she made an appointment with a therapist, a counselor of some sort. And I remember going to see him and telling him the woes of my daughter and how terrible everything was. So he said, well, you could go to, he listened, and he said, I could put you in the hospital if you'd like. And I remember thinking, I don't know, it must have been about the time One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came out. I don't know, I should research that. But all I know is when he said that, I could just see myself shuffling around in these little paper slippers and this little gown. And I did not like that picture. And I said, no, I'm okay. Just, and off I went. He sent me home with some tranquilizers that I didn't think worked. I took them for a little bit, and I didn't see, my life didn't get glorious again. So, so I kept going back to Al-Anon, and I truly believe. So now my daughter's living with my sister, and so she's kind of out of my hair. And I really do believe if God hadn't taken some action, I probably would have dropped out of Al-Anon and gone on living my life. But the universe has a way of things, and I really think so. Now I know all those coincidences, whatever they are, they were meant to be. And so I was going to Al-Anon, and it was a Al-Anon club that I hung out all the time. I would hang out there. They had a coffee bar, and I would hang out before a meeting, an Al-Anon meeting, or I was going to AA meetings as well, because I was trying to find out all I could and understand alcoholism and be compassionate about the disease. So, because I just so wanted, if my daughter was okay, then I would be okay. And so I did, so I lost where I was at. So my daughter's off living with my sister, and I'm going to Al-Anon, struggling, trying to work the program. I can remember this. Everybody, like I say, everybody pissed me off. I remember this one woman, and I came from like I say, a family. My father did not believe in getting angry, and I remember listening in a meeting. This one lady was talking about how she had taken a butcher knife to her husband. And I remember how appalled I was. What kind of people are these people? I was just appalled at someone who would do something like that, because anger I had not been raised with anger, and any anger I had, you wouldn't know about it. I kept it to myself. So anyway, in walks a guy. He had been sent by the courts to AA. And I'm sitting up at the coffee bar, and I see him come out on a court card. And I know enough that, all the new people, especially when they're sent on a court card, they're all nervous. And I must have been planning to go to the AA meeting that day. And he came in, and he sits down at the coffee bar and has a coffee. And he always tells the story about how he came in and he sat down at the coffee bar, and he sets eyes on me because I'm sitting at the coffee bar. Now, this was many, many years ago, and I was quite young, 35 at the time. And so he tells his story as he sets his eyes on me. And he's thinking, maybe this isn't going to be so bad, going to AA meetings, And he pokes the guy next to him that he's sitting next to at the coffee bar. And he says, hey, he nods me, and he says, who's she? Who is she? And the guy sits next to him is another alcoholic. And he says, you don't want anything to do with her. She's an Al-Anon. And my husband says, as he tells the story, he says, I didn't know what an Al-Anon was, but I figured it was something like being a lessee or something. And he says, I could fix that. It was love at first sight for him. And anyway, so now I've got an alcoholic in my life again. And we, in a very short time, we get married. Everybody at the Al-Anon Club had bets on how long the marriage would last, because they figured we'd probably end up killing each other. So anyway, we get married, and it didn't take long for trouble to go. I have never been lived with anybody now for almost 5, 6, 7 years or something. I'd been single, and I'm headstrong and not in touch with any of my emotions. And my husband too is very, very dominating. He's insecure, he's jealous, and trouble brews. Let me just put it that way. And he becomes abusive. he became abusive. It's not all that he was abusive. I was a crazy bitch myself, and he had come in. I had a house, and he had moved in after we got married, and because I couldn't get close to people. I would get uncomfortable. I couldn't hide anything from him, and I would get very uncomfortable living together with him, and I would tell him he would have to leave, and he would have to leave. And then a few weeks later, I felt better, and I wanted him back, and he'd come back, and then I'd get upset again and kick him out again. So the last time was the last straw, and he was pissed, and he wasn't going anywhere, and he ended up. And I'm scared because he's threatening. He's not leaving, and he ends up throwing me on the floor, and end up breaking my big toe. And but either way, he was not. And when he got angry, I got scared. Now here we are, two people. This husband, he had come from an abusive family. His brothers fought, everybody drank, and everybody beat up on each other. So he came where he was no stranger to anger. I'm raised by, if you get angry, like you've lost possession of your soul. So here's us two come together. He thinks I'm crazy because I never get angry, and I think he's crazy because he is angry. And either way, he's angry, and he won't let me leave the house because he knew I was scared, and I would probably call the cops on him. So he keeps me in prison, and then he feels bad because he's upset me so much, and he tries to have sex, which was really rape because I didn't want it. And anyway, finally in the morning, he calms down, and he leaves. And he doesn't leave, but he lets me leave. And I marched right over to the neighbors, and I asked to use the phone, and I called the police. And so basically, to cut the story short, because I've got 45 years of stories. So he goes to jail, and once more I feel he has a change of attitude, and I truly believe, and I do believe it was a change of attitude after the arraignment, because he was put up on charges. They decided he hadn't committed the crime, and he was facing 25 years. And we're ready to go to either trial, or he's going to take a deal. And so he calls me from jail, and he says, I could tell in his voice, and I know all women have these times when they cave and say they want him back, and I felt like that's what everybody thought. But I knew in my heart, I just knew in my heart that he had changed. And he said, I'm taking the deal, and I asked for a suspended sentence, which means that if I even touch you, I'll have to do the whole 25 years. And I want you to feel safe. So anyway, he took the deal, and he got off on a suspended sentence, and we worked at it. And I could go on with this forever, but the marriage got better and better with Al-Anon and working the 12 steps. And what I tell everyone now, I realize that, like I say, I probably would have dropped out of Al-Anon and kept on my crazy path. But with him in my life, I stayed, and I didn't leave him. And I worked a program. I was in Al-Anon rooms day in and day out. And thank God, because the program started sinking in. And so my daughter by this time has had a daughter of her own, and and my daughter is not sober, and we became estranged because I ended up turning her into CPS because I was worried about the baby, and she was drinking. She got married, and there was all of that going on, and anyway, I turned her into CPS, and she quit speaking to me, and so basically, we were estranged. We became estranged, and my husband we became estranged in I don't remember. She was, but she was my granddaughter was 4 years old when we became estranged. Um, so I went on getting better. And at, at, at one point, she started talking to me again. And I just remember she was pregnant and she had this abusive husband, and she would tell me about how he was kicked her and beat her and this and that. And I said, look, if you don't leave him, I can't handle this. I can't watch this happen. It's, before you were pregnant, it was your life. Do with it whatever you want. But now there's a baby involved, and I just can't handle that. And so that's, like I say, when we became estranged, and so we became estranged, and it went on and on and on. And at some point, I decided she must be dead or brain dead from drugs, because I figured if she had gotten sober, she would have contacted me. And so my husband passes away, and my sister is ill, and she's dying from cancer. And my husband passed away in 2004, and then in 2015 my sister passed away, and I took care of my sister for the couple of years before she passed away. And so we talked, and because we weren't close. I called her my best friend, but we weren't close in the sense, my sister, I was by now I'm with all my Al-Anon, I'm pretty much an open book as far as what I know about myself, and thank goodness, because when I was taking care of my sister when she was passing away and dealing with her family, there was a lot of dysfunction going on in that family. But anyway, so my sister is dying, and she, by this time, she had converted to Judaism because the family wanted her to. She was going to marry this man, so she was Jewish, and but after they divorced after 28 years of marriage, and my sister believes, she says, I'm an atheist now, and so she believed in that. And in my religion, I had no religion, but I called myself spiritual. And I remember when I was in high school, I had told my father, come home one day and told my father, one of the few things that he told me that I remembered, I told him that I just didn't think I believed in God. And he says, all right, but you take a look at the seasons and the birds and how all this big universe is coordinated. And he says, you about have to believe that there's something bigger than yourself. That's all you have to believe. And I thought, well, that really made sense. So I believed that there was somebody bigger than me orchestrating this life here on earth. So that was my thing. But my sister thought she was an atheist, and I said, well, that's okay. It doesn't bother me that you think you're an atheist, but how could you not think that there's something else? And so she says, well, it's just science, it's all just science. So I said, okay. I says, but I tell you what, I said, she knows she's dying. So I said, if after you die, I said, I want you to give me a sign and let me know if I'm right about there being a higher power. And I don't know, I was just kind of joking around when I said that, but I figured, she's if she's dead, and she's dead. But if there is a higher power, she won't be just dead. She'll know that there's a higher power. And so I don't know, I guess she said okay. So the day she passes away, the very next day, my daughter contacts me. This is after 16 years of being estranged. She contacted me, and I'm going, and she's sober, and she's married, and I knew I had two granddaughters, but I never knew I had two great grandsons. And I just know it was something that my daughter did. I had also joked with my sister that she could give me a sign that I would know it was her. And I said, maybe it could be some good-looking guy, because I had decided that I really didn't want to die alone like my sister was. So anyway, and 6 months, it was less than 6 months, 4 months later, I was at a Tucson Book Festival, and I had been they were having a horse show there, and I was taking pictures at the horse show, and they had said, do you ride horses? And I started remembering my high school girlfriend, and I Googled her, and come to find out she lived right there in Tucson. And so she had, we called each other, and we went to dinner and caught up and everything else. And I was asking her about the old high school boyfriend that I had, the one that I was in love with. And she says she had been to the 50th high school reunion, and she says, I don't know, I think he's dead, So anyway, I says, oh, okay. And so a couple days later, I go back to California, and she lived in Tucson. And I get a friend request from this old high school boyfriend, and I had met up with him in 1987, and we had met and talked, but I was married at the time, and so it was nice catching up and everything else. But I went back to I'd met him in our hometown. I was there for some function. So anyway, so he had found me in 1987. So anyway, he messages me. So and he says, friend, and hello, friend, on Facebook. And I thought, well, I'm not married now. Well, ends up he's married, and but the connection between us now, I understood, because I say shortly after this meetup, I realized that we'd had a connection all along. And so anyway, so of course nothing can happen, because he's married and everything. But oh gosh, what happens to my life after that? So of course, my daughter has contacted me, and I go to see her, and she was having a birthday party, and she says, do you want to come? And I remember driving that 50 miles from Riverside to San Bernardino, and I would be seeing her after 16 years, and one of the first things she said to me when we finally talked after we found each other on Facebook, she says, I've grown up a lot. And I thought to myself, because I had so much Al-Anon now, I lived, ate, and breathed it. I understood myself so much better. And I says, I have grown up too. And we're still, that was 7 years ago that we reunited. And if anything I want to say about Al Anon is that I learned from Al Anon was letting go and letting God. And I know I had to let go of her back then, because I would die. I was going to either I was going to be bankrupt financially, but I was also going to die emotionally and spiritually if I kept trying to fix her. And I had to let her go. And all those years, I thought, like I say, she was because I really thought she would come see me if she ever got sober and make her amends, But so and God did such a better job than I ever did. And so there's just so many things that I've learned, but they've all been hard lessons, really hard lessons. So yeah, you are only as happy as you make up your mind to be. I've let go of guilt, and I've learned that I have this saying, and I think it comes from the big book, thank God for the good in the seemingly bad. But seemingly bad has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. I had 2 alcoholics in my life, and God bless them, because they changed me. And I know that I couldn't have been married to anyone else but my alcoholic, who had been abusive to me and dominating, and so dominating. But I learned how to stand up for myself, and I learned how to respect him. And I am so grateful for him. I'm so grateful that my daughter got me here. I learned how to love. I've learned how to love in this program. I can remember, like I say, I came here with no feelings at all, and I can remember hanging around the AA club, and I was probably a good year before I was at this AA club, and this kid, younger kid, used to come, and he had lost custody of his children. He was divorced from alcoholism, and he was going to AA, and he had been trying to staying sober and trying to get his kids back. And I watched him go through that. I didn't think much about it, but one day he walked into the club, and he's so happy because he says, I finally got custody. I got custody. I got to see my kids today. And I began to cry. I began to cry with him because I'd watched him go through this, and I never thought that it had affected me, but I was crying like I am now. So I was so happy for him, and I've never felt like I never cared about anybody, and never got close enough to feel that what I'm feeling now. I didn't know how to feel. And when I started crying, I was appalled at myself because I couldn't stop, and I couldn't believe I was reacting this way to this kid that I felt like I hardly knew, except that he came to AA all the time and talked about how he wanted his kids back. So I've learned how to feel. I can remember I wasn't married very long to Jack, my alcoholic. And I was, at that point, we were just married, and I'm not used to living with him. I can't get close to anybody, and now I'm married to him, and I was so uncomfortable, and we were driving around the lake one day on a Sunday drive. We took those, and he pulled and parked at the lake, and he says, there's been some things that I've been putting up with from you. And when he started to say that, I thought, because I'd been bottling up all these things that I was pissed off about him and what he did and how he treated me and whatever. And all of a sudden I said, you're upset with me? I couldn't believe that. But the fact is the anger just welled up inside of me, and I said, and I started just screaming, how in the world? I says, you want to, I says, here, I've been putting up with a few things too, and I'm screaming at him out of control. And I remember him sitting across the driver's seat from me, and his eyes, uh, this man who, had been abusive, but his eyes just got huge in surprise because he couldn't believe that I was yelling and screaming at him. And when he smiled, and I thought, oh my God! And I saw myself, and I had never let anybody get close enough, because if you pissed me off, I just ended the relationship. And why I had stayed long enough to allow him to have this kind of effect on me was, again, Al Anon's business. Al Anon is responsible, and I know my higher power is responsible for that. But so we laugh. We ended up being able to laugh about so many things, because uh, about how he used to bully me around, and I would scurry around and take it. And there came a time when I just didn't take that anymore. And I, like I say, so I learned how to deal with my feelings. And then when Jack was diagnosed with cancer, I realized, it was no longer could be about me. He had a bigger uh, war to fight, and so, I learned to be compassionate and understanding, and learned to be accepting, um, and then I also realized that I was writing books by this time. I've been writing books now for 12 years, and one of the books, when I reunited with my daughter, one of the um, things that I found out was that my daughter had been running away from home at the age of 14, and she ended up becoming a prostitute. And when we were reunited, my granddaughter was dying, basically, from AIDS and meningitis fever and valley fever, meningitis and valley fever. And she had been a prostitute since she was 14. And I had just finished a book, and part of this, it hinged on sex trafficking. I had done all the research for it, and I thought, oh my God, when my daughter told me that she was a prostitute, I had all the compassion in the world. I understood, and I couldn't believe, but I knew all what my granddaughter's life had been like, and I was lucky to be there for my granddaughter when she was dying, because my daughter was so angry at her. She couldn't understand, if she would just come home and leave that life, she kind of could have gotten better on a lot of her illnesses, and lived a pretty good life. But she wouldn't stop, and I was able to be there and love my granddaughter and understand where she had been. And so, what had caused me to write a book about that touched on sex trafficking, I know today was it's all choreographed, I guess is the word, and so many coincidences now, and I'm basically aware of all God's signs when He gives them to me. I've learned how to love someone. I've learned how to get close to people, and I've learned how to care about people. And but then, not only has Al-Anon taught me how to care and get close to people, but it's also taught me how to let go. So all of these things, all I know who Judy Hart is today. I don't know who she'll be tomorrow, because on Destiny's Road, there will always be obstacles and losses along with the good times. But if I'm rigorously honest with myself, and others, I can trust tomorrow and that I will be better than I was yesterday. And we are all connected to one another. Thank God for Al-Anon, and thank God for AA and this fellowship. Thank you for letting me share.